Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for an Awake Security webinar titled CISO Perspectives, People at the Perimeter, Managing Risk in a Zero Trust World. My name is Roald, and I'm the VP of Marketing at Awake Security. Zero Trust is one of the most trending terms in security. In this ZT world, we care less about what device is being used, what network the access is coming from, etc. For this model to be effective, our security infrastructure must understand who is making the request and what they are trying to access. This is why the concept of the people perimeter is gaining much traction within risk management circles. But what does it mean beyond the words? How do you upgrade your security program to handle this new world? We're delighted today to be joined by Malcolm Harkins, who serves as a CISO advisor to our board of directors and leadership team. Currently the Chief Security and Trust Officer at Cymatic, he previously held the same role at endpoint security AI leader Cylance. Malcolm has also served as the Chief Security and Privacy Officer of Intel Corporation for more than a decade. He has received numerous awards and recognition and is a frequent speaker at industry events, published many articles, and is the author of Managing Risk and Information Security, Protect to Enable. In fact, one of the most popular chapters in this book inspired this webinar. So without further ado, Malcolm, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Rudolph. And thank you, everybody, for joining. As Rudolph said, this talk is inspired by a chapter in my book that dates back to a dialogue I had at Intel with my security team circa 2005, so 15-ish years ago, around the notion of, quote unquote, the vanishing perimeter that we were talking about then. And the concept came from when I was having this debate and discussion with a bunch of the security architects about the challenges, the problems, and again, this vanishing technical perimeter. I was like, hey, the perimeter hasn't vanished. It's just the people are the perimeter, where they're computing, how they're computing, what device they're on. And because personal computing has really become more personal because I wear the computer, I have it in my pocket, I use my desktop. You know, the notion of how we think about it needs to shift. And again, this is how it kind of plays into the zero trust world. But I want to start with this video. It's a couple minutes long. Some of you may have seen it a few years ago from Jimmy Kimmel's show. But it's an interesting thing because I think as a security community, we typically say it's the user's fault, and here's some probably pretty good reasons why.
You know, we've been hearing a lot about cybersecurity lately, largely because of what happened to Sony. Companies and individuals are more concerned about the safety and privacy of their information than ever. President Obama has unveiled a number of new proposals this week to crack down on hackers, and he plans to address this in the State of the Union speech on Tuesday. And it's great that the government is working on this, but the truth of the matter is we need to do a better job of protecting ourselves. You know, the most popular password in the United States is password 123. And as long as that's the case, we're vulnerable. So today we sent a camera out on a Hollywood Boulevard to help people by asking them to tell us their password. And this is how that went.
We're talking about cybersecurity today and how safe people's passwords are. What is one of your online passwords currently?
It is my dog's name and the year I graduated from high school.
Oh, what kind of dog do you have?
I have a Chihuahua Papillon.
And what's its name?
Jameson.
Jameson. And where did you go to school?
I went to school back in Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
What school?
Hempfield Area Senior High School.
Oh, when did you graduate?
In 2009.
Oh, great.
It's like my cat's name and then just like a random number.
Okay. Have you had this cat for a while?
Yeah, she's my childhood pet.
Aw. And what's her name?
Her name is Jolie.
Jolie. So like a password of yours would be Jolie and then a number.
Yeah.
Like number 1?
Like my birthday.
Oh, when is your birthday?
June 12th.
Oh, nice. And what year were you born?
95.
Oh, great. So Jolie, 6/12/95.
Yes.
Got it.
So you mean to give my password right now? No, I cannot do that.
But we all want to know what it is so we can tell you if it's strong or not.
Oh my goodness. Let me think. Okay, one is Tel Aviv. Yeah. 468, and then Israel. It's only 3, but it's, you know, it's for me it's strong enough.
Ireland 1 2 3 4. Gemma 1 2 3. Spelled Gemma.
Well, most of them are Italian.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. So like,
what's a good Italian password?
my grandma's name.
What's your grandma's name?
Maria.
Maria. So Maria is your password?
Oh yeah, now you know my password. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, the important thing is they learned a terrible lesson. We've been hearing a lot about cyber.
Hey, well, I'll stop on that. It's a funny video, and obviously it's a few years back because Jimmy Kimmel was mentioning Obama as president and right before the State of the Union. So again, 4 or 5, 6 years ago. But the amazing thing is that issue is still predominant today. And you can see study after study, people share and reuse passwords. Heck, even on the IT and the administrator side, think of all the default passwords we stick into things, or just the administrative passwords that we keep simple. Why? Because we want that ease of administration at times. But I don't necessarily think it's the user's fault per se. Certainly, weak passwords, you could argue, is, and some ways in which they manage credentials are. But I'll explain that further as we go along in terms of why, in many cases, it's not the user's fault. But I want to start with a little bit of a historical perspective first. Again, if we think of where we're at and where we've been with technology, about every 100 years, you have these massive segments of technological evolution and social and economic benefit and to some extent risk issues that come out of that, dating back to the 1700s, where we had steam, coal, railways. And again, that ushered in a new era of industrial capabilities for the world. And then, starting in the 1860s and stuff, electricity, communication, oil, gas, mass production. And again, that jumped the world further into a new segment. And then when you think of, kind of where we've been and where we're at, right now, the whole internet and Internet of Things and, the smart everything and renewable energy, and even the things we're seeing with other industries like biology and stuff like that really started ushering in the 90s. And when you think about this march of technology and you think of them in 100-year segments, if you look at where we're at now in 2020, we're 30 years in. So we're still if you think of the internet as a movie, we're still in the beginning of the story and plot development, which is both exciting on the one hand, but scary when you look at it from all the risk issues we've created. And so again, put it into context of where we're at and why we struggled to some extent with some of these things, and why sometimes the security industry and the security teams go to the simple answer and blame the user when perhaps they shouldn't. And in fact, just earlier this week, I had posted something on LinkedIn. Some folks may have seen the SANS breach. And there was an article in SC Media that talked about even an organization that focuses on security training had a user issue where they installed a malicious extension into their system. And I looked at it and I'm like, that's not a user issue. That's again, a technology failure to identify that it was malicious, stop it from being installed, or identify the hack once that code was installed. The lateral movement and the things that were happening was really the failure that caused the leak, not the user adding an extension that the system let them do that was available to them. So when you again step back, and some of you may have seen this from me before, in terms of what's been going on in the past few decades, we've had this perfect storm of risk brewing, right? Because threats exploit vulnerabilities, as we all know, exposing our information assets, causing business impact. And our job is to put controls in place. The challenge, though, is information assets, logically, physically, their usage models continue to evolve and change, which again grows the potential attack surface. And the controls have deteriorated over time with things that we've installed, 15, 20 years ago, or even 3 or 4 years ago, that the efficacy of control has deteriorated. And then it's further exacerbated by the cycle of geopolitical stuff. We've seen it in the news a lot, right? Nation states are threat actors and threat agents. they're also ones that are creating vulnerabilities. They also have a legislative arm that, again, causes a different type of business risk, right? That sometimes draws compliance obligations. And those compliance obligations are typically dated towards controls that were in place, again, years ago. And again, then you think about the assurance side. I want to know where Malcolm is, what he's doing, what device he's doing it on. Is it really Malcolm, right? And all of that. And that means I've got more identity information around Malcolm, his behavior, his devices, passwords, his credentials, all those things. But the more identity information we gather, the more risk we're generating from a privacy perspective. Why? Because of the privacy laws. And guess what? The threat actors and threat agents are going after that identity information. Why? Because if they can gain access to the things that we're using to anchor our determination of, is it Malcolm or is it not, then they can pretend to be Malcolm. So again, this perfect storm, unfortunately, continues to brew, which is why we need to change our notion of how we think about some of the controls. Now, again, from my first book and then my second book, where I added a couple other irrefutable laws, and I'll just go ahead and build this out because I think it becomes what I've seen and what I've experienced. You know, despite encryption, despite DLP, all that type of stuff. Law number one, information wants to be free. Why? Because people will post, share, and talk, right? We can put all those controls in place, and to some extent we need to, but we also have to recognize that there's information wants to flow, it wants to be free, so we can't fully mitigate some of that. Code wants to be wrong. I think we know that all the time, particularly when we see all the patches that happen across every segment of technology, right? So you can't eliminate risk. Services want to be on. Again, those background capabilities that as IT organizations and security teams, we use to administer the systems or users turn on for their convenience. And again, that's a perfect vector of an attack, because if you can compromise the service, you can own everything around it and what it's connected to. Users want to click. You know, how do I open an attachment? How do I do anything in computing? I'm clicking on things. So telling your users not to click on things isn't the answer, because all you're going to do is impede them from using the compute device. And so again, it's a technology issue. Even a security feature can be used for harm. Why? Well, let's see, it's generally made up of code. It's a privileged service and users want to click. And security teams themselves are not immune from weak passwords and other things. And this brings me to the next law. The efficacy of control deteriorates with time. It's like having, you know, a dam or a berm with a waterway. The pressure of those forces erodes over time the control, which is why we constantly have to kind of be weeding and feeding our environment. And when we've got a deterioration in control, we've got to be leaping to the next one. Otherwise, we're going to have that dam break and a substantial breach or attack or ransomware that affects our environment. Again, code needs to execute to perform its function. We've got to recognize that those footholds, and yeah, there's in-memory attacks and other things like that, but there's an anchor point to a large extent of malicious code execution. Law number 8, controls create friction. Again, that impedes business velocity. That creates complexity for IT. That drives, in some cases, your user around the control. And then since we've all kind of moved into being digitally driven organizations, you know, particularly in COVID-19 with everything being online and the remote work, you know, as we leverage the digital opportunities to either maintain our business or grow it, our obligation to do it right grows as well. So we have an ethical responsibility to think about how we're using technology, how we're creating it, and perhaps the risks it might be creating and how to mitigate those. And then the common denominator of all these things is people. Why? Because we're the creators of the technology. We're the operators of the technology. We're the security administrators of it. We're the IT administrators of it. Or we're the business decision makers around what controls to use and how to use them and where to place them. So either way you look at this, whether it's the typical user or the other side of it, the business decision maker, the security team, people side of it's the common denominator. And choosing the right technology, implementing it the right way, and doing it in a way that gives us the efficacy of control we need, it's our choice. So that gets back to what's the most significant vulnerability we face today in the future. For me, it's always been the misperception of risk, because users misperceive it when they add an app, or when they visit a website, or where they don't contextually think about the things that they might be emailing, sharing, posting, storing, right? Or even data labeling. IT folks misperceive it because of, in some cases, the sloppiness with which we implement technology. And as decision makers, we misperceive it. So again, it's a me issue and a we issue. We all misperceive risk. And that's driven by two fundamental factors. The economics of things, the budgets that we have, the choices that we make based upon the limited resources we have, and the psychology of it. On the psychology of it, users and even IT folks, they do what I'll call the shiny bauble syndrome. They get enamored with certain things. It's cool, it's neat, it's whatever. There's a psychological phenomenon that when people perceive a benefit in something, when they get enamored with the coolness of it or something like that, they psychologically discount the risk. So again, when you get enamored with something for one reason or another, you discount the risk. Now, on the other hand, security teams, audit teams, compliance teams also misperceive risk. And that's what I'll call target fixation. And target fixation is a phenomenon that was started to be articulated in the early 1900s during World War I. The Allied planes were doing strafing runs, trying to fire at troops on the ground that were the enemy forces. And they had a high crash rate because they were so focused on the target that they were looking at, they lost contextual understanding of how close they were to the ground, and they crashed. Or they would lose sight of the fact that something might be coming at them from above or a different angle, and they get shot out of the air. And again, I think we do that same thing at times in the security teams. I've had dialogues where people have said that DLP stopped exfiltration of sensitive data, and I've told those peers, I was like, it may have, but that was the ruse. That was a false alarm to get you target fixated on the fact that they rang the DLP bell because they happened to be trying to extract something that was labeled top secret, or extract something that had the signature of a social security number and stuff like that. I mean, if they were smart enough to get in and bypass all the signature-based things and the weak controls, what makes you think they'd be stupid enough to trigger the DLP signatures, right? So that's where we have to think about these things differently. Leverage advanced technology so that we don't get that target fixated on the simple things, and we have more context, more advanced capabilities to understand, to analyze, and give us a higher fidelity capability to determine, is somebody on my network, and is it the wrong person? Are they doing the wrong things? And do that in a much more advanced way than we've done in the past. Some data for us to consider, cyber risks in the top several risks of the World Economic Forum for past 10 years, give or take a little bit. Again, we've got a degradation of trust that we've seen in the world. So it's again up to us and our organizations to reestablish that trust, particularly in our systems, in our technology, in our ability to protect the data that our shareholders, our customers, and society expect of us. Security professionals do a lot of this because of the morality. They see the social responsibility of it. Yet our job is to manage vulnerabilities, but most of us say our organizations are extremely vulnerable. So we're obviously not doing a good job. we've got inadequate engagement sometimes with the board and the execs. And we've all seen and heard the stats on CISO turnover. And I don't know if the number is exactly 2 years, as some say, or 4 or 5. I think it's somewhere in between. But most of them leave their jobs due to corporate culture, which again says that there's not a cohesion, there's not a fit within the organization. And that could be because of this last stat, where 61% of board of directors said they'd compromise in cybersecurity for a business objective. This is a pretty sorry state that we have to manage, which means we need better technology, better tools, better instrumentation, so that we can more cost effectively manage and mitigate risk. Again, I've said a number of times, and probably even in some of the Awake webinars that I've done, that the security industry profits from the insecurity of computing. There's data here on the correlations between these things, and the market caps of existing players growing when their customers were breached. And so again, it's up to us to look at this. It's up to us to figure out how we transform our environment and how we adjust our controls. And in some cases, it's a tune-up of existing controls. In other cases, the deterioration is significant enough. We need to up-level the controls. We need to re-engineer them. Again, I won't belabor my 9 box of controls because I've shared it on this before, but we've got to move ourselves from this late stage reactive approach into things that are way more automated, so that we can detect things earlier. We can prevent the damage before it really occurs. And we've got to do that in a way that gets yield out of those investments, because that yield will help us with how we manage cost. And if done right, we'll also be able to remove the friction from IT, from the user experience. We won't be fumbling in the dark looking for things. We'll have the lenses, the capability, the visibility to see across the network, see across the devices, identify, is that really Malcolm? Is that a device that I trust? Are the actions and where they're going on the network, or interactions between other things and applications and data appropriate? Again, this gets me to the notion of velocity versus control, and the fact that we've got to improve our business velocity, not only holistically for our organizations, but we got to improve the velocity with which we're acting in our security organizations to find the things that are going wrong and get on top of them, so that we don't end up in the situations that we're seeing day in and day out. And again, the rapid growth of ransomware that we've been seeing again the past few months. Again, I like to tell stories. One of the ones that I like to have people think about in terms of velocity versus control is the South Pole expedition from 1911. There's two teams that set out in October of 1911 for the South Pole, roughly about the same time, a few days apart, roughly in the same geographic area. They were, miles apart, but roughly similar in everything. And one of them was a team that was well funded. They had the pedigrees. The other one, not so much, but they were a solid team, but they had more discipline. They had more focus. And the team that made it to the South Pole first was Amundsen's team. They actually made it to the South Pole, made it back. And then when Scott's team got to the South Pole, almost 30 days later, they discovered the flag that was planted by Amundsen and his team. When they left to head back home, unfortunately, they all perished on their way home. And you go, what was the difference? Why did one have such amazing success, and the other one not only failed to get there in a similar time period, but they all perished? I mean, substantial implications of it. Amundsen had this view that victory awaits him who has everything in order. Defeat is certain for him who has neglected to take all the necessary precautions in time. I think we see the same thing playing out in the technology space and in our security teams. We are not doing everything. We're not having everything in order. We're neglecting to take responsibility for the deterioration in our controls on the network, on the endpoint, and other things, and substantially change them so that we can avoid the disasters and we can mitigate the risk and again, change the dynamics of the industry. Now, the story of this was very well articulated in a book, Great by Choice, that was out 10 years or so ago. But what they found when they looked at Amundsen and his team, they looked at other business leaders and organizations that had a tremendous amount of success. And I think the same thing is true in the security organizations that I know. Those that really do a good job, yeah, they'll have issues, they'll have problems, malware will take a foot, but there's nothing that is substantially material that has impacted them. And you go, what are those characteristics? It's fanatical discipline, right? Again, just constantly weeding and feeding, constantly looking for things, constantly upgrading your technology stack if it's deteriorated. Productive paranoia, right? I grew up at Intel, right? Only the paranoid survive. So always looking for what's not there. A level of creativity, right? And then just limitless ambition that I'm not going to stop. And when they looked at these things, it was different behaviors, not different circumstances. So why is it that we see some of these breaches occur? Circumstances, I think, yeah, the attackers and stuff like that you might be in a higher target segment and stuff like that, but I still think it boils down to our decisions, our behaviors, and the choices that we're making in the technology that we're using and how we're deploying it. And that brings me to a Formula One. I love Formula One analogies. Why? Because they're taking tremendous amount of risks, right? Think of the speed with which they're doing. But when you look at Formula One, everything about it, the car, the braking system, the track, everything is designed for two things: speed and safety, right? And are we doing that same thing when we look at our networks, we look at our endpoints, we look at those interactions? Heck, even the spoiler on these things is designed to create a friction, but a good friction, a friction that creates cohesion towards the track, cohesion towards what the driver wants to do. And too often our controls disrupt that, or disrupt IT, which again causes problems. And so we have to look in many cases for security controls that are more invisible to the user experience, that are instrumented in sophisticated ways, but provides that simplicity of our ability to focus very quickly when it sees something so that we can take action on it. And then again, in the Formula One, you've got the discipline, control, communication, collaboration between the driver and the pit crew, right? So again, when you look at our organizations today, you got a SOC that's in many cases separate from the NOC, that might be separate from the IT help desk. And those organizational dynamics occur, but again, how do we instrument those things together in a collaborative way? I've had examples in my past and currently where the security teams is many cases, particularly if you've instrumented security the right way with advanced capabilities, particularly on the network, you can not only find those advanced things and other things that might be happening on your network by intruders or attackers or stuff like that, but also in many cases spot operational issues and help your counterparts. So again, there's additional value from doing these things if you think about them the right way. That again gets you to business velocity and control. They don't have to be opposing if you do it right. Again, this brings me back to the people side of it and your field of view, your angles and apertures on what you're looking for, how you're looking for it, whether or not you get target fixation, and whether or not the technology is instrumented in a way to alleviate that and give you, again, a higher fidelity signal. I love this quote from Dewar, the creator of the Scottish distillery. Minds are like parachutes. They work best when open. You know, radar up, antenna on. We've constantly got to be able to do that. But again, just like with that analogy, you know, radar from the 40s isn't nearly what we have with advanced radar capabilities today, whether it be for weather or planes and stuff like that. We've got to take that same thing and do that also on our network. We've got to up level where we're at and how we're looking for these things. Again, some simple analogies. Again, the target fixation. If you just have a tool or technology that gives you one angle of view, one level of an aperture, again, you might be missing the next thing. You need to be able to dial these things in a broad array, but you have to leverage the technology to give you that additional insight, that additional capability. So again, it's not a manual task. You're not fumbling in the dark looking for things because it doesn't have the advanced capabilities that you need for understanding your network, understanding what's occurring on it, and spotting the unique things that we should be focused on. Again, another camera thing here, right? You know, you're looking at the antelope, but you know, the real threat isn't that, it's the lion over in the bush, right? You might be a hunter and you spot the antelope, but the real thing you need to be worried about is the other item. So again, how do you think about that when you're hunting in your environment as well? And again, make sure that you don't get target fixated. How do you make sure that you've got not only the skills, but you've got the tools that give you the capacity to understand these differences? Getting back to users and controls, you know, telling them to stop doing something or putting up, you know, the caution flags and stuff like that. It can be useful, but again, I'm a former finance guy, a former economist. I had done some transportation economics analysis years and years ago. The most effective and efficient traffic control mechanism is a roundabout. Yeah, there might be some, you know, infant mortality and some issues if people have never driven them, but it's more effective and efficient because traffic continues to flow. You're not sitting there idling. You know, when people go into the roundabout, they become risk aware, they slow down. And so again, how do you think about, you know, this notion of allowing your users and the network to continue to grow and add that business velocity and opportunities, but instrument it in a way with a level of fidelity that again brings a level of awareness to your users so they slow down, but also a level of signals intelligence on your network, you know, with that security lens that allows you to spot the anomalous things and take action on it without disrupting the rest of the environment. You know, people are the perimeter and the target. You know, it's a true fact. You know, my computing comes with me. People are coming after my identity. They're coming after my devices. And again, with all the things going on, whether it be all the breaches that have gone on in the world, the number of years, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten breach notifications, but it's probably been 10 times the past few years. So is it likely my username is out there? Absolutely. Has my credentials been compromised? Absolutely. Heck, you know, the OPM breach, a lot of personal data about me was breached, which means that the attackers can create a very, very targeted, unique phishing example that might coax me or others into clicking on something, opening something. So again, let's not blame the users for that. Let's look for technology solutions that understand that the user is going to click. The phishing thing is going to be highly sophisticated towards individuals, so they're likely going to think it's real, you know. And then how do we manage and mitigate that other than by looking in a way that allows us to find that needle in the haystack? people have heard from me before, my protect to enable. We've got to do this so that we can protect the people, protect the data, protect to enable the business and the business velocity. Yeah, bottom line on much of this stuff, we can affect the people perimeter. We understand, again, the attacker's motives. We understand our users' motives. We understand the motive of our organization. Understand the economics of the things. Frame the risks better. Understand the control deterioration, control design. And we got to challenge our current control and technology paradigm. That's upon us to recognize the things that we've been using the past several years, even though they may have been, quote unquote, a better IDS system from what we had, in 2000 or 2005, and we bought it in 2012, 2013, and yeah, that may have been an incremental improvement to the old stuff. It's a time to leap ahead and to look at things differently. And with that, why don't I pause and Rudolph, I'm sure we might have some questions or comments, and we can start hacking those, taking those down and seeing what people have to say, and hopefully I'll be able to provide some perspective on any questions people have.
Excellent. Thanks, Malcolm, for the insights. Yeah, just as a quick reminder, we have some questions already, but if you've got a question or a comment, definitely use the Q&A or the chat features in Zoom. It's typically at the bottom of your screen. So Malcolm, here's a few questions that came in. So, one of the things, and I think you kind of touched on this with the whole notion of, you are the computer essentially, right? Given everything these days is an IP address, what is identity anyways? What has your experience been on technology that works well in this kind of situation?
Oh, it's a great question, right? Is the identity the username or password? Well, that's a portion of it. Is the identity the MFA ping I get on my phone from my bank? Well, that's a portion of it. Is the identity the cookie they deposit on my system that, when I clear my cache, it doesn't know me anymore? Well, that's a part of it. Is the identity my user behavior, my mouse movements, my keystrokes, right? Where I've gone, what I've done? The answer is it's all of that, which is why the context of instrumentation of as many of those things as possible in a single pane of glass, so that you're also not having to stitch all this stuff together in a SIM or a SOAR. We need those things, but if they're all independent things, which some of them need to be, but we've got to instrument looking at the totality of those things to really get the efficacy of control, because any one of them, you got to question whether or not it's valid or not. I mean, IP address, I come over a VPN. Well, all of a sudden it looks like I'm coming in from Iowa when I'm sitting in Folsom, California, right? What good did that IP address tell me? Nothing, right? So you have to look at other things, particularly on the network, to really determine that identity and the appropriateness of it.
And then I think we have another question, Malcolm, that was probably inspired from one of your slides. This one's probably about the market cap for the security industry. What are your thoughts on how the security industry as a whole is dealing with this new reality of the people perimeter, or are we?
It's a good question. I think the industry, by and large, and I don't necessarily mean to throw anybody under the bus, but I'll throw my peers under the bus, and then some segments of the industry under the bus with my statements, without hopefully naming folks. Again, we blame the user. So CISOs, IT organizations, the media, user clicked on something, the user fell for a phishing thing. That's a technology failure. When somebody clicks on something and something bad happens and something walks out the door, we failed the entire technology stack. So one, CISOs, security awareness folks, CIOs, and the media, stop blaming the user. Let's finger point the technology that failed. So that's one problem. The other side of it that gets fueled by the industry, again, itself, the security players, is, and again, I believe in phishing exercises. I believe in all that stuff. But this whole notion of, again, testing my user to see how they're going to screw up, that also fuels and adds kindling to that fire to blame the user, rather than say, why didn't the firewall stop it? Why didn't my endpoint protection stop it? Why didn't my network security technology spot these things and alert me so that I could take action, or better yet, be instrumented in a way that mitigates the issue, right? So I think, by and large, the security industry, it's convenient to blame the user, right? If I'm the security team, it's convenient for me to say, well, the user opened this attachment and we've done training for them, right? Then take responsibility for it. And then I think because of the weakness of the controls that have deteriorated, that have been sold by the security industry, it's easier for them to blame the user too, rather than to pinpoint the specific technology that didn't work.
Maybe the title of the webinar should have been "People Are the Problem" rather than "People Are the Perimeter."
Yeah.
We have one more question, and again, keep the questions coming if you have anything you'd like Malcolm to weigh in on. So this one's kind of more, dealing with the current times. It says, like many others, we are coming to the people perimeter reality thanks to COVID-19. What is your guidance on building the airplane while hurtling through space?
Oh boy, it's an incredibly tough problem, right? I mean, yeah, that's a good analogy. Or I'm changing the tire on the car while I'm driving down the road, and I don't know that anybody's stunt people have done it, but you got to put yourself up on two wheels on the side and then try and go out the window and change the tire, right? It definitely feels like that, but at the same time, that's a business problem that every business has. Again, I'll give an Intel analogy. You're manufacturing product with a certain level of physics, certain level of process technology in a factory, but to get the next leap of compute capacity and performance and reduction in power consumption and make them smaller, you can't retrofit the factory while you're building the factory. Well, in some cases, what you've got to do is lay new track and then shut down the old stuff. And then the question just becomes, how do you transition between those things? So businesses do that all the time in manufacturing. They do that all the time. There's always a legacy. And I think we just have to recognize that that's will always be the case. And we have to make the hard call of laying new track and then shutting off the old stuff. And that's the other problem we've got in the industry. We just continue to layer more stuff on rather than go, I'm going to jump from this technology to that technology and kill off the old thing, end of life it, and change the paradigm. So I don't think there's an easy answer, other than it all boils down to good strategy, good choices, and then recognizing, that time period. So for me, if I was looking at it, I'd go, how do I phase in something? And if I don't have the staffing, I don't have the resources, I do a managed service around it. Why? Because I'd get instant capability on the new thing while I'm shutting off the old thing. And then either you leave it as a managed service, or you start phasing it back in, and then you use the managed services experts to augment, so that you have some ability to burst and you have extra eyes and ears and stuff like that, again, to kind of negate that target fixation. So I think there's ways to do it, particularly in spaces. And I know Awake has launched a managed network detection and response. I know some friends and peers that's exactly how they're doing it. They're going down the managed NDR route as the quick path to leap ahead while they're phasing out, the data technology where they've been just fumbling in the dark, not finding things. And then they'll figure out how to, again, get that equilibrium back and perhaps bring some of the stuff back in or manage it jointly. But to me, that's an easy way when you have a managed service to do that, because that allows you to get that new track quickly, new capability quickly while you're doing your phase out.
Excellent. So I think that's all the questions we had, Malcolm. Thanks everyone for joining today. If you'd like to view or share the recording, these are always available on Awake's YouTube channel. You could also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, where we stream these live, and you can read some of our other insights. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Awake Security webinar. Visit us at awakesecurity.com. Thank you.